So we are in the last two-thirds of Moses's farewell address in the book of Deuteronomy. Shoftim was where we begin. That's chapter 16 of Deuteronomy. Hi, Maridel. Um, Chapter 16 of Deuteronomy, and then we get into what certainly what the rabbis and the scholars consider to be the final the climax of his oration. Um, and indeed, some of them say some of the paragraphs may even be out of context. Certainly, scholars say that some of it was added in later, later editing in because that it kind of refers to things that hadn't happened yet. But okay, so we're going to start with Shoftim. I'll talk about Shoftim. I'll talk about Kitetse, and then I made a little bit of a goof. Gene had asked about doing Kitavo, um, and so did David. So we're gonna have two lessons coming out of Kitavo, and then I'll come back with Nitzavim with whatever time we have left at that point. But we go back to Shoftim, which, as I said, starts in the middle of chapter 16 and runs through the beginning of chapter 21, Deuteronomy. Shoftim v'shotrim, judges and magistrates. Judges and officers. Shoter is the modern Hebrew word for a policeman or a police person, I suppose. Um, the and the most famous quotation out of the Torah portion of Shoftim, I joked about it when we read it here at services, that of course the most important thing about the portion on the Shoftim is that it was my daughter's bat mitzvah portion. But besides that, it had importance long before Karen came along. And the phrase with which so many people are familiar, it graces many arcs of the for Torah scrolls around synagogues around the world. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. But we'll put that in context. Moses tells the people. Now, this is all in anticipation of their crossing over the Jordan and coming into the promised land, that they should appoint a system of judges near the top of the hierarchy, but there should be local magistrates, or like I say, even going down to the level of what we would call police people to maintain justice, law, and order. That's how the society of all the tribes are to be governed. The most important phrase or challenge to these judges and magistrates again is tzedek tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. The word justice is repeated because we know how difficult it is to maintain justice. Much of the commentators uh, determine justice in the sense of impartiality and objectivity. That's the way that they see the most important criteria for how justice will be administered. And they recognize how difficult it is to find that impartiality and objectivity. That's why it doesn't say just do it, it says you must pursue it because it's fleeting. And sometimes it runs away from you. So you have to follow after the sense of justice to make sure that it is maintained. He talks about Moses, then talks about capital punishment, and tells the people that in their system or in their society, the death penalty can only be administered upon the testimony of a minimum of two witnesses. If there aren't two witnesses to the event, then the individual may still be deemed guilty, but there's no death penalty associated with it. So two impartial witnesses must agree and testify that the death penalty would be warranted in this particular case. If the local judges find that a case is too complex for them, which must have happened, they are entitled, or they must refer it to a higher court. There was a hierarchy, I guess what we would then call today the Court of Appeals. And then, if the Court of Appeals, the next highest level, if they still could not find or agree on an answer, response, punishment, or acquittal, whatever it might be, then it was then brought to the priests, and ultimately the priests, although in the Torah, in the text in the Torah, it doesn't say priests. It says, incidentally, it says Elohim, which is the word that we're more familiar with, that means God, even though it's in the plural. That's up for a whole other discussion. But Elohim in this context, it's not that they would bring every particular difficult case directly to God. They would bring it to those who serve God, meaning the priests, is how it was interpreted. The next thing Moses talks about is the let's call it the purity of the ritual cult that was the Hebrew religion at that time. That people should, this is a familiar phrase, people should worship Adonai, our God, only, and that the purity of their worship meant that the intention of the worship, which at that time was offering sacrifices, so that the purity and the intention was clear, and not just trying to take advantage or exploit a particular situation. Obviously, again, Moses reiterates the familiar theme of do not worship any idols, and do not be swayed into idolatry at all. Then they get into an interesting section in this Torah portion, that the people uh, may choose. This is Moses speaking. The people may choose, after conquering the promised land, they may choose to set up a monarchy. They don't have to, but they have Moses's permission to do so. And he specifically sets up a number of criteria, characteristics for who could serve as a king. It doesn't say as a queen, but I suppose it could, because they talk in terms of a malchut. They talk in terms of the sovereignty or monarchy, as we said. And here is where it's very obvious that this particular, at least this set of paragraphs, were added in much later. Because if you know anything about either the biblical literature, the text as we have it, in the Bible after the Torah, or if you even remember from the stories that you might have heard in Sunday school or whatever. So listen carefully. The king or the queen, but the monarch that the people may choose, must be an Israelite. Okay, that we can understand. Cannot be a foreigner, cannot be someone who was foreign born, had to be someone who was born in the promised land. Secondly, that individual could not own, nor could he or she purchase horses. Uh-huh. That individual could not have, here we're talking of men only, could not have many wives. Uh-huh. Also could not have huge storehouses, warehouses with great treasures being stored in I don't mean Mar-a-Lago. No, stored in his or her palace, whatever it. And it seems to be almost a direct challenge and criticism of King Solomon and those in the Solomonic dynasty, who were known for the number of horses that they owned, the horses that they bought, the stables that they built in all of the king's residences and palaces all over the country, taking away not only agricultural land, but having to use a lot of the grain and grass and whatever to feed the horses as opposed to feeding the people. Solomon, of course, had many, 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 and then many more wives, according to the tradition. And that Moses was not happy about, even though Moses, according to the text, had two wives. But there's a difference between two and many. All right, and couldn't have these huge storehouses that we were talking about. So it seems pretty obvious to most of the scholars, not necessarily the traditional commentators, but most of the scholars say this seems to be a later addition and in direct criticism of Solomon and his sons. Um, in Moses's words, however, and what the classical commentators focus on is that the king has to have two qualities, if you will. The first and the most important is humility. And of course, when the same commentators, when they talk about Moses, who in several chapters from now will die on the top of Mount Nebo, but never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses because of his humility and because he knew God face to face. The humility comes first. So that was obviously a very important characteristic, a personality trait that Moses wanted the leader of the people to maintain. And then the second, and it came second in the list, was knowledge of Torah, which later on, beginning with Hezekiah, later on it's understood as that means that each king or queen, but each monarch must have a Torah scroll written for him or her. So that they not only had knowledge, but they had possession of their own Torah in that sense. So that's what Moses suggests would be the criteria for the monarch. Um, Moses continues to reminding the people that the Levites, the tribe of Levi, will not be allotted any portion of the land once they've crossed the Jordan River and conquered and inherited the land. The Levites do not get any portion of the land. They don't have any territory, because there were some Levites who lived in all the different tribes to assist with the sacrifices. They themselves were only allocated certain parts, and usually not the best parts of the animals that were sacrificed. That they were given those parts of the animal for their own nourishment and food. Yes, they were given the bikurim, the first fruits of certain fruits, of certain collections of wine or oil. They were given the first shearings of sheep that they could either use for their own necessities or they could sell if necessary. That was their compensation for serving as the Levitical priests. Moses goes back to a common theme that has been mentioned before of not following any false prophets, and specifies don't follow along a prophet who talks about believing or adhering or worshiping any other god besides Adonai, besides our God, the one who brought us out of Egypt. Then also, finally, he established. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not finally. I got another page of notes here. Um, he reestablishes the cities of refuge, which we encountered last time we met. Places where there were seven, then it was increased to 10. The places where someone who had been accused of an of death, if there had been an accident and unintentionally someone died. The example that Moses uses is someone who's chopping a tree and the axe handle flies off and hits his neighbor in the head and kills him. It was unintentional. It was accidental. But the man who died, his family might his survivors might want to take revenge on the fellow who was chopping. So they have this system of cities of refuge. City, we might today use the phrase cities of sanctuary or sanctuary cities where justice could be administered. Again, he might be found guilty of manslaughter, but not of murder, first degree murder, and he would be protected. He would be, and he could live and live out his sentence in that city. Uh, but all sentences were automatically terminated upon the death of the high priest. That's so the court didn't say, okay, you will be sentenced, using that example, manslaughter rather than murder. If it was murder, they sent him back home. But if it was manslaughter, then he would be imprisoned in the city of refuge until the high priest died. So the crazy thing, there's a discussion in the Mishnah about it, that at any one time there always could be people in Israel who were hoping for and praying for the death of the high priest, because that would be their release in that sense. Um, um, as a sidebar, it comes up and connected here that Moses tells the people, make sure that you don't move any of the landmarks, any of the stones or the markers along the roads, along the caravan routes, that might give people help them, and signposts. Say, Beersheba this way, Jerusalem this way, whatever. Don't move any of those, and it's put there in the context of people who might be fleeing to a city of refuge, that they would know how to get there, but also in the context of, remember that uh, we don't have the authority to move anything like that, because the land belongs to God, and God is the one who is leasing it, as it were, leasing the land to us. We're just tenants on the land. We don't have any right to move boundaries around, things like that. Finally, um, uh, and sometimes they question why the portion Shoftim continues on through the next couple paragraphs, as opposed to linking them to the next portion, which you shall see. Moses begins, I guess, what we'd call the battlefield. The big, try to wishing the soldiers courage as they go into battle. And whatever that will take up quite a lot of, as I said, these last 2/3 of his final oration. But again, we picture, here he is standing on the top of the mountain or the hill, whatever, and all of his troops are aligned underneath him, and he, chazak ve'amatz, be strong, be courageous as you go into battle. But he begins something that's very important in Jewish history and continues even to the present day, and that's maintaining a moral stance, a certain standard of behavior, even in battle against your harshest enemy. We'll encounter that especially in next week Torah portion. But here Moses makes a point of saying, listen, this is going to be new for you. You've never gone into battle, life and death battle like this. You've had to battle the elements in the wilderness, but this is a difficult kind of battle. And if there's anything that might be causing you hesitation, then we recognize that, and we don't necessarily want you in serving in the military, serving in the army, when you have any hesitation. So he gives certain people he gives them the out. He says, if there's anyone here who has who has built a house but not dedicated it. Now today we would say that means putting up the mezuzah. But if they built a house in and but it hasn't been finished yet, built a house but you haven't moved in yet, okay, you're exempt from battle. Now it doesn't mean you have to stay home, but you're exempt if you have any hesitation because of that. If there's someone who has planted a vineyard but hasn't yet harvested it, you are exempt from battle. You're excused from going forward into battle. If someone is betrothed but not yet married, or I guess we would say, but not yet consummated the marriage, yes, you are exempt from going into battle. But he doesn't stop there. He then further says very clearly, if you are afraid, you're exempt from battle. Okay. So a recognition that this was going to be a new, potentially tragic experience for many of them. And he's trying to build up the courage and the morale among all the people. And to further this notion of Steve, do you remember what's the Hebrew phrase for the morality of the weaponry? There's something neshek. You're muted.
Yeah. Sorry, I muted. It's called Torah HaNeshek.
Okay, all right. It's from the
Torah HaNeshek. That's what they teach you in the army.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I forgot if it was Toar or Toharat or whatever. Yeah. It's the purity of weaponry
Or
in
purity
that
of
sense.
arms. Yeah.
Purity of arms, right? Maintaining the moral standards, which throughout Jewish history and into the present day in Israel is subject of great debate and very often misunderstood, certainly by the rest of the world. But anyway, and then Moses gives two more examples here in this Torah portion. One is that whenever you're
May I
approaching
ask a question at this point?
whenever you're approaching an enemy town, you must first offer them peace. There must be, you must offer to discuss peace before a formal attack. But if you are fighting, you're not allowed to destroy the trees of your enemy's city. You can take the fruit, or you can bring all the fruit, but you can't take the trees themselves. Um, if they are non-fruit bearing trees, yes, you can cut them down for your own needs, for military needs, for battering rams, for firewood, whatever it might be. But if it's
May
a
I ask you a question, Rabbi?
I'm sorry, David. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question. Some interpretation regarding what you said. If you are afraid, you do not have to serve. And my question is, when you interpret that, how can you be in the army about to go to war and not be afraid? I don't think that's possible. So that's my question.
Well, I respect the question, and I think theoretically I agree with you, but never having been in battle, never having served in the army, okay, um, I think, and I have to assume that the I don't know of a better word, but the peer pressure, of going into battle together with your comrades, gives you a kind of inner strength that you may not have thought that you had. On the other hand, if there's a chance that your fear or your hesitation is going to hold everyone back, then Moses is giving that exclusion. Whether it's to the individual soldier or whether it's to the commander who senses, Moshe, I get the sense that your mind isn't with it, your soul isn't with it, and so maybe you should stay back. Maybe you should, be the water boy. I don't know. That's just my Steve, you wanted to jump
No,
in?
no, no. I guess you sort of paraphrased what I said. I think the point is, if you're afraid to the point of actually having to voice it, because yes, everybody is afraid, but most are keeping it to themselves, and they're just going to go ahead and get beyond it, okay, and do what they have to do. But if you're so afraid that you're going to take one pace ahead of the line and say, you know what, I'm too afraid to go out there,
Mhm.
that's another level. So, and they don't want those people.
Right.
uh,
Right.
It's
Okay. Moses.
yeah.
Moses is kind of saying, "It's all right. We understand." If you know, okay,
Yeah,
all right.
and just a word about Torah Neshek, if I could,
Mhm. Sure.
stick it in. Like that's something they would repeat to us a lot during basic training, and I guess some of the squad leaders misunderstood it a little bit. They would use it to mean all sorts of things that it didn't necessarily mean, but ultimately the people who knew what they were talking about would present it as the ethical warfare, meaning it would be about, and they would even, I remember there was a film that they showed us once, or where some Israeli unit has to capture terrorists, but they've taken refuge in a civilian home, not, and they're getting an order to fire on the home, and the officer makes a decision that he's not going to do that,
Mhm.
that at personal risk, they're going to go in and, try and just get the terrorist and not harm the civilians. So
Right.
that's what I was taken to mean.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Most,
And
yeah.
sadly, again, the issue, the personal conflict comes up even today. So okay, let's move on. So the next portion is ki Tetzei, which, as I said, people sometimes question why didn't the previous paragraph begin this portion? Because this begins with ki Tetzei milchama, when you go out to war. So it's continuing. But anyway, ki Tetzei, which is chapter 21, begins chapter 21:10, um, has the most mitzvot, the most of the list of out of the 613 commandments of any of the Torah portions. 72 mitzvot, many of whom none of us in our lives would ever be in a position to either decide we're going to fulfill that mitzvah, or not decide we're not going to, or just not be even presented with the issue. Many of them have to do very specifically to things that happen or could happen in the promised land, which sad to say is not Green Valley, or Albuquerque. I'll include that for Meridel, where she is now. But so I'll just throw you a couple of examples out of the 72, some that may be more familiar. It's a mitzvah that soldiers or Israelites must give fair treatment to women who are captured in battle. Um, there's a discussion in the mitzvah of um, making sure that the firstborn, that the father's firstborn is the one who inherits, no matter how many wives he might have. Okay, it's the firstborn of the first wife, not necessarily the favorite wife, but the first wife. Um, of course, there's the familiar, but we don't believe it ever happened. That if you have a disloyal or disobedient, recalcitrant child, that you're entitled to stone him or her to death. But we don't believe that we don't ever believe that ever had ever happened. There are quite a few of the mitzvot labriut.
Thank you.
That quite a few of the mitzvot that relate back to where we are in the Saturday morning Torah group in the portion about chapter 22 of Exodus, talking about if your neighbor has loaned you an animal or a garment, or if you come upon a nest, and you want to take the eggs, but you take the eggs but you out of the nest, but you have to leave the mother bird, so that she can still give more eggs in the future. There's like I said, some of these are come out of different contexts and milieu and environments, or gestalt, as they would say. There's no mixing of wool and linen clothing together. Shotnes is what it's called. Don't mix in the your animals that are leading your cart. Don't mix an ox and an ass. Don't yoke them together. Things like that. There's another commandment that you must wear the tzitzit. You must wear the fringed garments. We don't have the time to go into it, as fascinating as it might be, but how the groom or the groom's family is entitled to check on the virginity of the intended bride, or if they had a question whether the bride the potential bride is possibly being accused of adultery. There's a whole long section about that. I mean, it must have happened, otherwise they wouldn't have included it in the text. All slaves of every origin are who might be seeking refuge from harsh conditions, and their masters must be taken in, must be treated respectfully while the investigation is going on as to what really might have happened. No taking or charging of interest from Israelites. Yes, you're entitled to ask interest of foreigners, but not of Israelites. If you have loaned, if there's a pledge, you've given your garment or something in a pledge, and you want it back, you're not allowed to take it back or to interrupt, like the family dinner, to take it back. You don't go into your neighbor's house in front of his family and embarrass him about, hey, give me back my shirt or my jacket or whatever it was. And similarly, making sure that for laborers that their wages are paid on the day that they are due. Again, we have mitzvot that relate to strangers, widows, orphans, what is owed to them, the rights that they have, the expectations that they have of the community, and that anytime that we're harvesting, we always leave a corner, or you can't, if you decide, if you all of a sudden realize that there was a part of your field that you didn't harvest, you didn't cut the sheaves, you can't go back later on to do it. You can only get the one chance. The rest of it is for the poor and those who need it. There's a discussion of what we call levirate marriage. That's where if a married man dies, and especially childless, that his brother steps in and automatically marries the widow, and they try to provide a male heir to the family. And then there's a particular ritual. If he says, no, I don't want to marry her, whatever, there's a ritual that must happen publicly so that she's not shamed if she marries someone else. Moses tells the people, again, this is a repetition of the holiness code back in chapter 19 of Leviticus that we will be reading on Yom Kippur afternoon. Make sure that the weight, your system and your equipment to measure weights and measurements for any commercial enterprise or interaction, make sure that they're all that they're all honest. And then the Kitetse, the portion ends with the reminder of the attack that Amalek attacked the Israelites, especially the rear guard, the women, the children, the elderly, those who were weary and weak is the phrase. Amalek attacks them in a, while they're marching. The main body of the Israelites turns around and they defeat Amalek, as it were. But because of that dastardly deed, so Moses, it's the contradictory statement of remember what Amalek did to you, but blot out his memory. It's the same kind of notion that we have with Haman on Purim. You know, Haman, who supposedly is descended from Amalek, is that remember what Haman did, but blot out his memory. That's why we use the groggers, and people write Haman's name in the bottom of their shoes and stomp and stomp and stomp and scratch out and all that. David, are you saying goodbye or just a wave? A wave of acknowledgement. Okay, all right. Okay, so that's Kitese. That brings us up to Kitavo. Um, David, let's do it this way. Just on the off chance if you have to leave at any moment, let's ask you to do your part first. Again, with my apologies to you and to Jean that we had the doubling up. But David, why don't you do your teaching first, and then we'll turn to Jean afterwards.
Okay, David, you're muted.
And again, we recognize that you're on a phone rather
Can
than
you
with your computer.
Can you hear me now?
So we don't have the telescope right next to you like we usually do.
No,
So-
we don't. No telescopes. Anyway, I'd like to begin with a little story. I told this to the rabbi last night, and he didn't say I couldn't share it with you, but I think it's kind of meaningful to me. So I think I will begin by sharing that with you. And it is last week, Wendy and I were driving to a couple of weeks ago, to one of her appointments along a long road, very narrow, hardly any traffic, but there was a large truck in front of us. And Wendy suggested I slow down to give the truck a lot of room, which I did. And then in my mind came this idea, a vision in a way, of a motorcycle going in between the truck and me and fairly close to us. So I slowed down a little more for the motorcycle. And then as I saw the motorcycle more clearly, there was sort of a haze or a halo around it. And I realized that God, the Almighty, was driving the motorcycle. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm pushing the image out of my mind, and it keeps on coming back. A little bit later this afternoon, God says, how did I do on the motorcycle? And I said, you were an excellent driver, but I thought you knew how to drive a motorcycle. I thought you knew everything. And God answered, everything except that. But for you and Wendy, I had to learn how to ride a motorcycle. Anyway, so I'm going to do this. This is an interpretation of Kitavo. I'm actually going to begin with a very wonderful book that Marty Cohen and Sue Cohen gave to Wendy and me a number of months ago. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs' book, Covenant and Conversation. It is highly recommended. It's a 5-book set, one for each of the major biblical books, books of the Torah. Anyway, it starts by saying that in this portion of Kitavo, Moses reaches the end of the detailed provisions of the covenant. And it's really, the end is quite complex. Then he goes on to say, to introduce us to the late Sir Isaiah Berlin, one of the great sages of post-war Britain, brilliant philosopher and historian of ideas. And he did more than anyone else to define the liberalism that took the shape in his lifetime. And he gave a magnificent lecture, which I've got to find, Two Concepts of Liberty, which became one of the most famous essays on politics in the 20th century. And he had a lot of interesting things to say about Kitavo, especially that Moses, in the book of Deuteronomy, over 21 times, he uses the verb zokar, which means to remember. And in 14 of those times, he also warns the people the opposite, which is not to forget. And he goes into the two types of memory. There's history, which is the account of events that occurred to sometime else and to someone else. But memory is my story. And I think what Moses is trying to do is cement the image of my story. There are a number of readings. There are 7 readings in this book, and let me go through them. In traditional Shabbat Torah, this parsha is divided into 7 readings, and in the first reading, Moses is directing the Israelites that when they entered the land of God was giving them, they were to take some of every first fruit of the soil that they harvested, put it in a basket, and take it to a place God would choose, assuming that that would be the place where they would set up their portable sanctuary. And in the second reading, and I'm trying to go quickly so that we have time for the other interpretation of Kitavo. In the second reason, Moses is instructing that when the Israelites had given the 10th part of their yield to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, in the 3rd year, the year of the tithe, they were to declare before God, I have put away the hallowed things out of my house, and also have given them to the Levite, etc. The third reading, going along, Moses is exhorting the Israelites to observe these laws faithfully and enthusiastically with all their heart and soul, noting that they have already affirmed many times that the Lord is their God and that they would obey God. And God obviously agrees. He affirms that the Israelites were God's treasured people. In the fourth reading, Moses and the elders are charging the people that as soon as they've crossed the Jordan River, they're going to set up large stones on Mount Ebal, to coat those stones with plaster and inscribe on them all the words of the Torah. Obviously, they're going to need an awful lot of plaster to do that. And then we have the fifth reading. When we're done with the plaster, Moses has charged the people, but after they had crossed the Jordan, the tribes of Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin were to stand on Mount Gerizim when the blessings were spoken. And the tribes of Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali were to stand on a different mountain, Mount Ebal. So this portion involves a lot of hiking and a lot of mountain climbing. In the sixth reading, they discuss the temple of the, there's a little bit of the discussion, but Moses is continuing that if the Israelites obey God and observe faithfully all the commandments, then God would rout their enemies, bless them upon their barns and all their undertakings. And one wonders, of course, as one reads this, why do the Israelites have so many enemies? Well, obviously, they're just parading across the Jordan River. It's too bad that the land of milk and honey is not more of a hotel where they can just walk into the lobby and be welcomed. But that's not quite the way it happened back then. And in the seventh reading, In the seventh reading, Moses reminds the Israelites that they had seen all that God did to Pharaoh in Egypt, and yet they still did not understand. Moses led them through the wilderness for 40 years. Their clothes and sandals never wore out, and they survived without bread to eat and wine to drink, so that they might know that the Lord was their God. And the sandals, they sure had a good sandal maker back then. And there's an awful lot going on here. And I'm wondering if at this point I should pass the baton on. I wanted to read something about the Haftorah, but I think I'm going to skip that. And in the interest of brevity, graciously pass the baton on to our next reader. And thank you very, very much for letting me do this today. And God bless you all.
Okay, thank you, David.
And you too, David. And I hope Wendy
Thank
is in good shape.
She's not, but thank you.
I had no idea that the blessings and the curses could be so interesting. And David, you talked about there's a lot of hiking and whatever, getting up into these, two mountains. And to tell you the truth, I had sort of a different blocking of the stage in my mind, that Moses had to divide the team into two sides, sort of, and that I see them sort of on the hillsides of the two mountains, because Moses or the Levites, whoever's going to be speaking, has to speak out and they have to hear. So can't you just imagine in a stadium seating, and you've got everything going back and forth? And I was thinking of going to the women's basketball games at Michigan State University, and one side of the sports complex goes, "Go green," and the other side, "Go blue," and together, "Go Spartans." So this is kind of how I was thinking of it, on the blessings and the curses, a little bit about that, and so.
You can also say that Kitavo is all about basketball. Great.
Oh, there you go.
That's wonderful.
There you go. But that's kind of how I saw the choreography of it. And David, you also talked about, when you arrive in the land, that whole little section there about the protocol of what we're supposed to do when we get into the land. And I felt like, what, I'm going to this great big family reunion where I don't know anybody, because it's really super extended family. But I've got to take my picnic lunch with me, put it on the table so everybody can partake in it. I got to check in at the front desk and sort of say who I am. And then I have to, sort of check in with the priest, like it says in the portion. And then it says you have to acknowledge having entered the land, and the priest takes the first fruits. Then you have to recite the story. This is like the Passover Seder. You got to tell the story. And the story is, it's like, getting into the speakeasy, I suppose, during Prohibition, where you got to kind of say who you are, and you got to show that but also you have to remember the story, like you were saying, the whole thing about remember, but the story of our forefathers going to Egypt, the growth of the nation, becoming slaves, then how God saved us by bringing us out to the land. So all of this has to be remembered and recited. And then we all have a great picnic together, so it's, and of course, at the end of any Jewish happening, whatever it is, we eat. Let's see. Okay, so let's go back to the stadium. And the two sides are going. Also, the notes in some of in the sources, the study Bible that I was looking at, talked about, why is it that some folks are on this side and some folks are on that side? Because note that the folks that are on the blessing side of the hill, are Rachel's children, Rachel's sons, and their people, and some of Leah's sons. The ones on the curses side are the people of the sons of the concubines, of Jacob's concubines, and then a couple leftovers of Leah's children. So anyway, since our book club just finished reading The Red Tent, I had to look, okay, who's Leah's sons, who's Rachel's sons, and the like. But that was kind of interesting. On the blessing side is the people of the favored sons. But going back to the stadium, Moses starts out with a whole list of curses. He doesn't start with the blessings. He starts with the curses. And, cursed is he who makes a sculptured image. And the whole congregation says, amen. I mean, can't you just imagine being in an AME church or something where the pastor says something and the whole congregation, amen. And it goes on for like 12 different lines or so of this. Curse to someone who insults his father or his mother. The people say, amen. And he goes on, accepts a bribe, amen. Curse to those who had to a man who has sex with his father's wife, amen. And it goes on like that. And the last one is, curse is the one who fails to uphold these teachings. And of course, everybody says amen, because they've been doing it all along. You can just see how the people are all riled up. But notice that last one, fails to uphold these teachings. Oh, crap. I wonder if there's more. I mean, all of these things are things that, okay, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to move my neighbor's property line. That's just rude. These are easy enough things not to do. But I have to uphold all these teachings that are listed on all that plaster that David talked about. So you kind of wonder, okay, what are we getting into? Then, of course, the other side goes into the blessings. And it can be a little poetic and a little specific as well. But it's generally, bless you in the city and in the country. Bless your offspring, your harvest, your farm animals' offspring. Many of these blessings are an opposite of some of the curses that are given a little bit later on. Some of them are kind of repeats, but essentially the blessings are blessing you and blessing your efforts and blessing your children, the fact that you will have healthy children. The Lord in his covenant established you as a holy people, and therefore other nations will look to you and they will see the Lord in you. So and then it sort of ends with the metaphorical. You will be the head, not the tail. You will be the top, not the bottom, but only if you obey and observe. Conversely, don't deviate from obeying. And so it kind of goes back to that first amen. Cursed be he who fails to uphold all of these things. Then, of course, the blessings take this much, in the book. The curses go on for pages and pages and pages. And we thought that the curses kind of just ended. No. Moses goes on. There's like 3 different, which, I thought they were just all kind of getting repeated. That's like enough already. But they're kind of broken down into 3 different sets of curses. Now, maybe this means they were written at different times or inserted at different times. Who knows? That's a whole science in itself. But the first set of curses after that first, blessings and curses, when he goes on, sort of begins with an if-then. If you do not, so that's a negative, if you do not faithfully observe the commandments, then the following will happen. Cursed are you in the city and the country. So we're sort of repeating the thing that we're making an opposite the thing of some of the blessings. Cursed be your basket and your kneading bowl, which is sort of cursed as your undertakings. it curses your womb, produce of your soil, calving and lambing, all your agricultural and ranching efforts, those will all be cursed. Cursed your comings and goings, a little bit poetic like that. Then there was a whole series of curses that if you do not faithfully observe, then, and it starts out, the Lord will inflict. So those first sets, it didn't really say anything about the Lord. These next ones, it's like God is making certain things happen. Calamity, panic, frustration. The Lord will inflict pestilence. The Lord will inflict consumption. The Lord will make the skies be copper and the earth iron. And it was a bunch of terrible things that it seems like it's God's fault, or God actually does it. Not God's fault, but God does these. He makes these things happen. He's bringing on the consequence of you not faithfully following. There was reference to some of the Egyptian plagues, like inflammation and boils. Then there's a whole series of curses. The following, if you do not follow if you do not faithfully observe commandments, the following things will happen. And like Rabbi mentioned in the previous parasha, someone who, if you are betrothed to a woman, but another will take her. So you didn't get the chance to be with your wife before you went to battle, for example. Your ox will be slaughtered, your ass stolen, your sheep will be given to your enemies. A curse that's particularly gruesome, I think. Your children will be given to others, meaning that, you know, your children will leave and they will not come back. So the whole legacy of your peoplehood is sort of being destroyed. Other peoples will eat the fruit of your produce, and you'll be driven mad from the sight of all this. So you're just going to go crazy with how terrible things are. Then it ended with the Lord will inflict more boils. So again, the Lord is making certain things happen. Some things are more grouped into a peoplehood that you will not, essentially you will not be a nation. God will drive you and your king to another place to serve others and worship other gods. So you will no longer have your own political independence. And even though you put out effort in the fields, the locusts will devour it. Even though you plant, the worms will eat it. Even if you have children, they will go into captivity. So you're screwed either way. And then it kind of go back into the metaphorical format that was before. You will be the head, not the tail. It ends here. You will, let's see, where am I? He will be the head and you the tail. The alien will be the head and you the tail. He will lend to you and you will be indebted to him. One of the blessings was that you will be a creditor, not a debtor. No, now you're going to be an import country rather than an export country. So you will be in debt, indebted to others and they not you. Then that sort of series of curses ends with a summary correction. In the notes of the study Bible I was looking at, they sort of summarized pretty well, and that is the blessings of agriculture and reproductive fertility coupled with economic independence and political sovereignty results from obedience. And then, of course, the opposite is true. The failure of the crops, the loss of progeny, coupled with economic and political domination by others, results from disobedience. So this is real cause and effect. There's consequences for everything. Then there's a whole second set of curses. And it's sort of because you did not obey. That first set was because you, let's see, where am I? If you do not faithfully observe commandments, is how that first set started. This one is because you did not obey. Well, first of all, it's in past tense. So you wonder, was this written kind of at a different time, possibly? You know, why are we looking at the past tense? Because you did not obey. I don't know, but in any case, it was sort of interesting way to look at it. But the set is introduced with because you did not obey, sort of a cause and effect. These curses are happening because you did not heed God and keep the commandments and laws, because you did not serve in gladness. Oh crap, that means we not only have to obey God, we got to be happy about it too. And that sort of adds an additional, oh, I got to have a good attitude also, you know, that's not necessarily fun. But in any case, you know, be appreciative. So curses will befall you because you did not obey. That was in the past tense. Curses are a proof against you and your children. And because you wouldn't serve God and be grateful, you will serve your enemy. So it's not, you know, you not only have to do it, but you have to be happy about it. Then it went into the second set of curses went into a whole paragraph of it's dedicated to describing what it will be like under the rule of foreigners, because of course one of the curses of not obeying is that you will be ruled by foreigners, by others, and ruled by foreigners who swoop down like eagles. So it's like coming at you with no notice. They will show no regard or mercy to the old or to the young. This ruthless nation will wipe out all your agricultural efforts. You will be shut in your own towns. In your desperation, you will eat your young. And the notes were saying, and I looked it up, that this actually happened. It was mentioned in Lamentations a couple of times. Also, an Assyrian inscription was found that actually said, "We consumed the flesh of our sons and daughters." So this is not just a metaphor, but supposedly actually happened, because people were so desperate. The most kind-hearted and tender people will become mean to others and will not share, and will not even share the flesh of his children that he eats. So, I mean, these are just really unimaginable behavior. Women will eat the afterbirth. These all are just really unimaginable behaviors that that he's listing. And all I could think about was, okay, that time must have been, you know, horrible back in ancient times, but in modern times, it got me thinking, what was it like in the ghettos and in the camps of the Holocaust? What kind of horrible things went on? Of course, we read so much, you know, we've read so much and we have learned so much from you know, modern history, but it kind of makes me wonder, well, what kind of behavior would I have if I was in such desperation like this? So anyway, that was a little sobering. The third round of curses concentrated kind of on three things. If you fail to observe faithfully the terms of the teachings, the Lord will inflict all these on you. And again, he's using that the Lord's going to do these things if you fail to observe. And he talks about life in Egypt. He talks about Abraham, and he talks about the diaspora. Moses states that life will be like it was in Egypt, with the plagues and sickness that will last, chronic sickness, even plagues and sicknesses that are not even mentioned. It's like including but not limited to all the things that I could possibly put into the Torah right now. Couple of verses talks about the promise to Abraham, the supposedly unconditional promise to Abraham. You shall, let's see. Oh, the promise to Abraham would be reversed. You shall be few after having been as numerous as the stars in the sky. So, of course, even repeating the same phrase that was said to Abraham. You shall be wiped out after being prosperous and many, driven from the promised land that you are about to invade and occupy. So God's promise to Abraham, they will, that can potentially be reversed. Not a fun thought as these people are getting ready to go into the promised land. And finally, describes the diaspora of the people with no political or religious identity. Scatter the people, serve other gods that you or your ancestors have not known. You will find no peace, nor your foot find a place to rest. And of course, we have the whole concept of the wandering Jew. Jews are being exiled from all sorts of places all the time throughout history. You will have an anguished heart and a despondent spirit. Depression will be widespread. Life will be precarious. You shall be in terror all the time, just trying to survive. You will return, and the worst part of it is you will return to Egypt and sell yourself as slaves, but they will not buy. So he says it like that, which is essentially the most humiliating curse that could happen, the most humiliating thing that could happen to the people. And then he ends this with, these are the terms of the covenant. So get out your pen and let's have your John Hancock kind of thing, is sort of how I inferred it. But this is the contract that God instructed Moses to make, to do. The next chapter finishes up the portion, begins with a summary of the last 40 years. And David talked about this, here we are. Oh, excuse me, something just came on my screen. I have no idea what that was all about. Forgive me, I must have pressed something. The clothes and the sandals you wore for 40 years have not worn out, must have been Birkenstock. You had no bread or wine, and yet, I led you through and you've survived. And therefore, faithfully, observe faithfully the terms of the covenant so that you may succeed in all that you undertake. And that's the end of the parasha. But it was interesting how he went at it in a couple of different sort of linguistic ways. And that's what I got out of the stadium seating of all of this coming at them.
Great. Yashar Kochachem. Thank you so much to both of you, to Jean, to David. I'll only make one little correction. The sandals weren't Birkenstock; they were Naot Teva, which is the famous brand in Israel these days. No, thank you very, very much. Very much.
May I
Appreciate
make
it.
a comment at this point?
Of course.
Yeah, I think Jean did a wonderful, wonderful job. I found it absolutely fascinating. I would like to say a couple of things about the Haftorah for that portion.
Okay, do it, David, do it quickly, because then I still have to add a few comments about this week's portion. So
Okay,
go ahead.
it's from Isaiah, and in the way I'm reading this, it kind of sounds like they're talking about eclipses and about denying the force of gravity. But anyway, here goes. It says, the sun shall no more thy light by day, neither for brightness shall the moon give light unto thee. about the Lord shall be unto thee an everlasting light, and to God thy glory. And then the sun shall no more go down, neither shall thy moon withdraw itself. Thank you, and back to you, Rabbi.
Okay, thanks, David. Um, Let me do this fairly quickly. Nitzavim is the next portion. That's this week's portion, um, and coincidentally, it is also the portion which has been assigned in the liberal Jewish communities around the world to be read on Yom Kippur morning. So if you don't get a chance to hear it this Friday night or Saturday morning on Yom Kippur, you'll hear the same message, the same words. The liberal community has decided to use this particular section rather than the section uh, from Leviticus primarily that deals with the other restructuring of the word Kippur from Yom Kippur or Yom Kippurim. So you may know the word kapara. Some of you have a background, remember Kaporis, Shlogan Kaporis with the, waving around the chicken or whatever is to asking atonement, and all the sins go upon this chicken. But there's a series of mitzvot that relate to the notion of kapara or kippur of the atonement that we say, which the liberal community has decided not to read that on Yom Kippur morning, but to focus more on what we should do and the choices, decisions that we make as human beings. And then in the afternoon, the traditional reading used to be about the role of the high priest in the ceremony and the ritual of seeking atonement for himself, for his family, for all the people. We still make a few references to that as well. But so this Torah portion from Nitzavim, the most familiar portion, is also we'll encounter on Yom Kippur. So just a few quick comments. I'm conscious of the time. As Jean was saying, Moses has now laid it out. Here is the brit. Here's the covenant. It was laid out originally. The first version of it, or covenant dot 1.1 was with Noah. Then 1.2 was with Abraham. Now we're 1.3 for the children of Israel as they come into their own land. So God says, I reestablish this covenant with you. And as was said, here are many of the different provisions, the expectations. This is what I will do for you, or this is what I expect you to do for me. If not, the curses will come upon you and future generations. But I remember my covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And as long as you don't worship other gods, then I am willing to continue and renew the covenant. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. I'm going to make it new again. We're going to renew it as it was in the past, now moving forward. But if Israel forsakes the brit, doesn't follow the covenant, receives severe punishment, they won't be totally forsaken. That's what we call in the rabbinic literature the nechemta. That's going to be, there's still a sense of compassion, even after all of the punishments, after all the curses and the go white and go blue and go green and whatever side, whatever everybody's yelling at each other and whatever, and God is unhappy with us, but God still says, ultimately, I will not forsake you. I may be upset, okay, this and that, and there may be these curses and punishment, but I will still bring the remnant back into the promised land. I will not forsake you. I will restore you. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, Hashivenu Adonai. These are all phrases that we'll encounter during the high holy days. So your choice, God says, Moses says, your choice is between life and death, between blessing and curse, in this context of all that we've been saying for the last several weeks. Uvacharta v'chaim. But I implore you to
This
choose
is-
life, to choose that which preserves life, that which sanctifies life, and that which will help restore and add meaning to the covenant. I won't go into all of the different commentaries like I usually do about that these are Moses's last words and things like that, and how some of them see the differences between some of the phrases, the way that he uses them now at the end of his speech as opposed to at the beginning of the speech. But I'll just focus on one thing. There's one phrase again that we encounter when we read this, and you'll hear it again on Yom Kippur. That Kihu chayecha ve'orech yamecha is the Hebrew. That God is your life and length of your days. Okay, and so one of the medieval commentators says, well, why does it have to be said twice? Well, we're talking of one God. I mean, God appears to us in various ways, yes, but it's one God. So why does it say that God is our life and God is our length of days? And the simple answer is that God is our life, meaning in our lifetime. In this world is the rabbinic phrase. That's in Ba'olam Hazeh, in this world, and that God is your life and in the length of your days. That refers to olam haba. That refers to everlasting life, the life, the eternal life that we have, our souls that we have after we die and give up this particular life. So everything about the choices that we make, about affirming the Brit, adding our John Hancock in Jean's phrase, everything that we do consciously, unconsciously, that affirms and sanctifies our lives, and that adds to the renewal of the Brit day by day by day by day, the renewal of that covenant, with the hope and recognizing God's promise that if we do that in this life, then God will be with us in the life to come, the length of our days. So, with that, we will bring this discussion to a close. Wishing everybody, David, we wish to Wendy Shalemut, sense of wholeness and peace. And to all of you, if we don't talk to you before the new year, Shana Tova, a good, healthy, peaceful year. May we have lots of opportunities to study Torah and to affirm each other. Again, I'll look at some dates, and we'll share an email about changing the time and structure of when we meet. But for the last year, I really appreciate everyone who has joined and helped in the teaching as well as the studying of Torah.